Hi, this is Eric. This is Desert Pitfall Part 1 Details Collisions. In this video, we're only going to look at the collision manager. We're going to look at the overview of it, the detail of each method, and the math going on behind it. Before we start, I wanted to show you where I got the idea for this, because there are a lot of AABB guides out there for access aligned bounding blocks. This particular one that I have credit to up here is the one that helped me out the most, and is the one where I kind of borrowed a lot of my ideas of implementation. So if we just take a look at their GitHub page right here, they've got a really nice graphic, and you can actually look at this source code and look at this really nice example of how it should be implemented. So in my game, we first sort along the x-axis, then we find all of our x overlaps, and then two things happen here. We find our y overlaps, and then we notify the collision pairs that they have collided, and then we allow them to resolve all their collisions. So let's look at each of these in detail, starting with the sort. So here's our sort along x-axis, and this is really just, I believe, a bubble sort. So we'll take our items, which is our pool of all of our collidables in the game. We start with the first one, and we compare it to all the subsequent items. And simply if our start position is greater than the other item's start position, we swap them so that we always have the smallest item in front. And so a quick kind of example of how that's going on is if we have our focus and then the thing we're combining or comparing to, and let's say these are our numbers. All right, we compare 9 to 7, 7's smaller, so we put that in front or we swap them. Our focus is still here, but now our compare index has moved over. And now we can say, all right, well, obviously, 1 is smaller, so we swap those two. And now our compare index is at the end, so we're done with that loop. So now we move our focus over, and we're just going to compare it to here. And those are need to be swapped, so we just swap them. Again, our compare index is now at the end of the list, so we're done. So now we have items in order. So that is how this sorting works. And if we take a look at the picture, that's already done for us. So we've got our A, B, C, D, E. You can see that their X1 positions are already in order for us. So that's nice. So once we've done all the swapping, we come down here to our find X overlap step. And it's very similar. We're going to start with our focus, which is the first box, and we're going to compare it to every box that comes after it. And if the end of our focus is greater than or equal to the start of the boxes compared to, then they're overlapping. And we'll just collect those as a pair and hold on to them for later. And if the current box does not overlap the box that comes after it, or whatever the subsequent box is in that list, then we know it's not going to overlap any other box past that point because we've already put them in order of their X positions. And so we'll just break our loop and find the next focus. And there's two other things happening here. The first one is I'm kind of casting everything to int here, and I do it here. And that's because my game is kind of a pixel game, and it's important that just because their decimal places are different, that doesn't matter, right? So if you have a item whose position is at 16.3 and something at 16.9, they're still going to get drawn by the renderer at pixel position 16. So they're going to look like they're colliding. And I need all my math, especially right here in the collision system, to recognize that, because I don't want those items to get drawn at the same pixel position but have no collision detection. So it's important at this step that I kind of turn all this into pixel space. So that's why we're doing these casts. I don't know, there maybe is a better way to handle this, but I really just need to chop off the decimals at this point. And then there's also some bitwise and comparisons happening here. And this is just because even if they do overlap, if they don't care about each other, then I'm not going to store them for future calculations, right? So in my game, for example, the player doesn't care where he's touching the big scrolling background picture. They do overlap all the time, but they don't actually interact with each other. So there's no reason to store those as a compare, uh, as a pair to compare later. So let's take a look at how this is kind of happening. So again, remember it's the end position of the block compared to the start position of the block that comes after it. All right, so if we're looking at block A, here it says end position, this is x2, and if this is greater than or equal to the one position of all the blocks that come after it, then there's a collision. So this is obviously greater than that of B, so we know we have a comparison or an overlap of AB. And then if we look at A and compare it to the next block, which is C, well, it's not. They don't overlap. So we're done with A. So now we move on to B and do the same thing. We find his second position. Is it greater than the position of the next block's start? It is. So we have a BC comparison. And we're done with B because if you look at the next one, then it's less than the start. And now we go to C. And he's not going to look at A or B because we're done with those guys, right? So we only have to look forward. So C is going to look at his end position, which is way over here. He overlaps a whole bunch of boxes. And his end position is greater than that of D's start. So we have a CD. And he's also greater than that of E's. So we've got a CE. And then we're done with C. And now we start with D, do the same thing, but he doesn't overlap at all. His end position is less than the start of E, so no overlap here. And we never actually check E. He's at the very end of the list. Everyone has already done their comparisons against him, so there's no need to even compare him, because there's nothing to his right, because we've already lined everybody up. All right, so we see we have 4 comparisons on the x-axis, and now we're going to move on to the next step. And this is our combo step. We're going to both compare on the y-axis and then also notify if there is a collision. So how do we check on the y-axis? This is simply if your start position, which is the top of your box, is greater than the bottom of the other box, well, you're not comparing, or you're not, sorry, not comparing, you're not colliding because you just don't overlap. And then you can also check as an OR if your bottom of your box is above the start of the other box, then you're not colliding as well. So those are the 2 comparisons we'll do. So this is, again, start, which is the top, if that's greater than or below the end. Where did this go? And let's just write that out so I remember that. So we're doing, oh, am I writing? Here it is. So if start, which is the top, is greater than end, which is start below end. And we also have end is less than start, meaning is end above start. We're going to drag this in so I'll make it a nice color to see. All right, so let's do checks here. So again, we're going to start just by looking at our pair. So we're looking at A compared to B. So is the start of A below the end of B? It's not, but we also have to check, is the end of A above the start of B? And it is. So this is not a collision, right? If either of these are true, that means there's a gap, they're not colliding. Now we'll look at B to C, which is our next pair. So is the start below the end? It's not. Is the end above the start? It is. Not a collision. And visually, we can see that there are no collisions that are going to happen. But this is the math going on that's letting us know. So C and D, again, here's the start, here's the end, but then here's the end above the start, so not a collision. And then finally, same thing, C and E, but there you go, no collision. So in this case, we had no overlaps, excuse me. But if we did, we would then tell the first item that it collided with the second, and then the second item that they collided with the first. And then finally, we have the resolve all collision step. And the reason this is separate than this, from this, is because I have a few items that actually gather a list of things they've collided with. And they need to wait until all the collisions have been done before they do their resolution on it. So that's why there's a separate step here that just notifies everybody, we're done, do what you need to do if you got collided with. So that covers this collision system, how it's being used. It's nice, short and sweet. I like it a lot. So thanks for watching, and see you later.